Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're cutting a path straight through a really dense part of the syllabus. We're zeroing in on group 17.
The halogens.
Exactly. Fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and iodine. And our mission really is to break down their physical properties, their reactivity, and all those redox reactions into one clear story.
And it's so fundamental. I mean, these elements are all about accepting electrons. Their entire chemistry is defined by needing just one more electron to get that stable noble gas configuration.
Right.
So this deep dive is crucial for understanding how that electron grabbing power, that oxidizing power, changes as you move down the group.
And before we get into the quantum mechanics of it all, let's just frame this group in the real world because it has this incredible duality.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking about elements that have been used for some of the worst chemical horrors, but also for the greatest public health wins.
Take chlorine. It's the perfect example.
Mhm.
Historically, its first major use was just terrifying.
The first chemical weapon in World War I.
Yes, because it's a dense, toxic gas that sinks into trenches. A horribly effective weapon.
And yet, that exact same element is probably the single greatest lifesaver in history.
No exaggeration. Adding tiny amounts of chlorine to drinking water kills off bacteria and has basically slashed the rates of diseases like cholera worldwide.
But then the duality just keeps going. You have the story of CFC's chlorofluorocarbons.
Right, which were seen as these miracle chemicals. They were so stable, so unreactive.
Perfect for refrigerators and spray cans.
Until, of course, they drifted up into the stratosphere. And that very unreactivity meant they survived long enough to get up there and start breaking down the ozone layer.
Our shield against UV radiation.
Yeah, a massive environmental disaster from a chemical property that seemed, completely harmless. This group is just full of these extremes.
So let's start at the beginning, the basics. What do these elements actually look like, and how do their physical properties change as we go from fluorine down to iodine?
Okay, so the first thing is they're all nonmetals, and they exist as diatomic molecules. So X2, held together by a single covalent bond.
And there are two really clear visual trends as you go down the group.
Yep. The first is the color. It gets progressively darker.
So fluorine is a pale yellow gas.
Chlorine is that classic greenish-yellow gas. Bromine is an orange-brown liquid, which is pretty unique. And then iodine is a gray-black solid that gives off this amazing, deep purple vapor when you warm it up.
And that leads right into the second trend, which is volatility, how easily they evaporate.
And it decreases sharply. The melting and boiling points just shoot up as you go down.
So you go from two gases, fluorine and chlorine, to a liquid, bromine, and then a solid iodine.
Exactly. And the reason for that trend is where we hit a really key concept, intermolecular forces.
Okay.
Because these are simple molecules. The only things holding them together are these weak forces called van der Waals forces.
So why are those forces so much stronger in solid iodine than they are in, say, gaseous fluorine?
It comes down to one thing, the number of electrons.
More electrons equals stronger forces.
Precisely. Van der Waals forces are caused by these temporary random fluctuations in the electron clouds. You get a temporary dipole.
Which then induces a dipole in the next molecule over.
Right. And the more electrons you have in a molecule, the more easily those clouds can be distorted, and the stronger those temporary forces become. So fluorine has very few electrons, very weak forces. Iodine has a ton of electrons, much stronger forces.
So it takes more energy to pull the iodine molecules apart, which is why it's a solid.
That's the link. Electron count dictates the physical state. It's a beautiful trend.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Let's shift from the physical to the chemical. How reactive are these elements, and what does it mean to call them oxidizing agents?
Well, they're called oxidizing agents because they accept electrons. That's what they do.
They get reduced themselves.
Exactly. When a halogen, like chlorine, reacts, its oxidation number goes from 0 in the Cl2 molecule to -1 in a compound. It's gained an electron, so it has oxidized whatever it reacted with.
And the main trend here is that reactivity just plummets as you go down the group. Fluorine is the most reactive, iodine the least.
It's a huge drop-off, and it perfectly mirrors their electronegativity. Fluorine is the most electronegative element there is, a 4.0 in the Pauling scale.
Now, hang on. That can seem a little counterintuitive at first.
How so?
Well, fluorine has a small nucleus, right? A charge of just +9. Iodine has this massive +53 nucleus. So why isn't iodine better at pulling in an electron?
Ah, that is the key question for group trends. And the answer is all about atomic size and shielding.
Okay.
Fluorine is a tiny atom, Its outer shell is incredibly close to the nucleus, and crucially, an electron coming into that shell experiences very little shielding from the inner electrons.
So that small nucleus has a really direct, powerful pull.
A very powerful pull. And that proximity and lack of shielding completely outweighs the fact that iodine has a bigger raw nuclear charge. Fluorine is just a far, far better electron acceptor.
The best evidence for this has to be the displacement reactions, right?
Absolutely. The rule is simple. A more reactive halogen will displace a less reactive one from its halide solution.
So if we take some chlorine water and add it to a solution with bromide ions, what do we see?
Well, chlorine is more reactive. It wants electrons more than bromine does, so it will steal the electrons from the bromide ions.
And the bromide ions become elemental bromine.
Right. And the solution, which was colorless, turns this kind of yellowish-brown color. That's the color of the dissolved bromine you've just created.
But those colors can be a bit faint in water. There's a trick chemists use to make it foolproof.
Yes, you add an organic solvent, like cyclohexane. It doesn't mix with the water, so it forms a separate layer on top.
And the halogens prefer the organic layer.
They do, and the colors are much more vivid. In cyclohexane, chlorine is pale green, bromine is a clear orange, and iodine is this unmistakable deep purple. It's a fantastic way to confirm exactly what's been displaced.
Okay, let's look at another reaction set with hydrogen gas to form the hydrogen halides. Does that reactivity trend hold up here?
It holds up perfectly. The reactions get less and less vigorous.
So fluorine and hydrogen
Explode.
Yeah.
Even if it's cool and dark,
bromine,
explodes. But it needs sunlight to get it started. It
bromine,
needs heating, and it reacts slowly.
and iodine, I'm guessing?
Barely reacts at all. You just get an equilibrium mixture, even with strong heating. The trend is dramatic.
This brings up a really interesting follow-up. If the reactivity to form these compounds decreases down the group, what about the stability of the compounds themselves? HF, HCl, HBr, and HI.
And this is where it gets fascinating because the trend completely flips. The hydrogen halides get less thermally stable as you go down.
Really? So HF and HCl are tough.
Incredibly tough. Stable up to like 1500 degrees Celsius. But hydrogen iodide, HI, starts to decompose with just gentle heating.
So what's going on there? It must be the bond strength.
It's all about the bond strength. The H2X bond energy just drops and drops. For HF, it's over 560 kilojoules per mole. For HI, it's less than 300.
And that's because iodine is just such a huge atom.
Exactly. So when its orbital overlaps with hydrogen's tiny orbital, the bond is really long. And the longer the bond, the weaker it is. The easier it is to break with heat.
That transition is perfect. We've established the neutral halogens are great oxidizing agents. Now let's flip it. Their ions, the halide ions, act as reducing agents, electron donors.
Correct. The trend is the opposite. As the elements get worse at taking electrons, their ions get better at giving them away. So iodide is the best reducing agent of the ions.
Okay, let's start with the classic qualitative test for these ions using silver nitrate.
Right, the precipitation test. You add aqueous silver nitrate and you get an insoluble silver halide, AgX.
And the colors are?
Silver chloride, AgCl, is white. Silver bromide, AgBr, is cream-colored. And silver iodide, AgI, is a pale yellow.
White, cream, pale yellow. Those sound pretty hard to tell apart.
They are, which is why you have to do a follow-up test with ammonia solution.
Yeah.
It distinguishes them based on solubility.
How does that work?
If you add dilute ammonia, the white AgCl precipitate just dissolves, gone. The cream AgBr, however, won't dissolve in dilute, but it will dissolve if you use concentrated ammonia.
And the iodide?
The silver iodide is so insoluble, it won't dissolve even in concentrated ammonia. That's the clincher.
Now, for the reaction that really shows the difference in their reducing power, reacting the solid halides with concentrated sulfuric acid.
Yes, this is the ultimate test. Concentrated sulfuric acid is a pretty good oxidizing agent, so we're seeing how well each halide ion can stand up to it and reduce it.
Let's start with chloride.
Chloride is a terrible reducing agent. It's just not strong enough to reduce the sulfuric acid. So all you get is a simple acid-base reaction. You see misty white fumes of hydrogen chloride gas, HCl, and that's it. The reaction stops there, no redox.
Okay, but bromide is a stronger reducing agent. What happens there?
Now it gets interesting. Bromide is strong enough to reduce the sulfuric acid. So you get the initial HBr gas, but that is immediately oxidized by the acid.
And what are the signs of that?
You'll see a reddish-brown gas, which is the elemental bromine, Br2, being formed. And you can also detect sulfur dioxide gas, SO2, because the sulfuric acid has been reduced.
And finally, iodide. The strongest reducing agent of the bunch. This one's pretty dramatic, I hear.
Oh, it puts on a real show. Iodide is so powerful that it reduces the sulfuric acid through multiple stages.
Not just a sulfur dioxide.
No, it keeps going. You see the purple vapor of elemental iodine, of course, but you also see a yellow solid, which is elemental sulfur, and you even get hydrogen sulfide gas, H2S, which has that unmistakable smell of rotten eggs.
Wow.
So that progression from just HCl to bromine and SO2 to a whole mess of products with iodide is the perfect illustration of their increasing reducing power.
Let's finish up with one last special reaction type. Disproportionation. Chlorine does this with alkali. What exactly is disproportionation?
It's basically a self-redox reaction. You have one element, in this case chlorine, with an oxidation state of 0.
And in the same reaction, some of it gets oxidized and some of it gets reduced.
Exactly. It's simultaneously oxidized to a positive state and reduced to a negative one.
And this reaction is very sensitive to temperature. Let's cover cold alkali first.
In cold alkali, say around 15 degrees Celsius, the chlorine is oxidized to the chlorate ion, Cl-, which has an oxidation state of +1, and it's also reduced to the familiar chloride ion, Kil-.
And this is the reaction that makes bleach, right?
That's the one.
So what happens if you turn up the heat?
In hot alkali, around 70 degrees, a different reaction takes over. The chlorine is oxidized to a much higher state, the chlorate V ion, Cl-3-, so its oxidation state goes all the way up to +5.
And that cold reaction, as you said, has a massive real-world use in water treatment.
A huge one. When you dissolve chlorine in water, it actually disproportionates in a similar way to form two acids, chloric acid and hydrochloric acid.
And it's the chloric acid that's the active ingredient?
Yes, the HClO and the chlorine ions are incredibly powerful sterilizing agents. They are what kill the bacteria and make our water safe to drink.
Okay, so to pull all of this together, if a student needs to remember the core trends for Group 17, what are the 3 big takeaways?
First, for the elements themselves, the X2 molecules. Their oxidizing power and reactivity decrease down the group. And that's all about fluorine being small with low shielding.
Got it. Second trend.
Volatility. It also decreases down the group, so boiling points increase. And that's driven by stronger van der Waals forces because of more electrons.
And third.
For the halide ions and their hydrides, the reducing power of the ions increases down the group. And that directly means the thermal stability of the hydrogen-halides decreases down the group because that H to X bond gets longer and weaker.
A really complete picture. We started this by talking about the duality of these elements. You know, the hole in the ozone layer from safe CFCs versus the billions of lives saved by adding simple chlorine to water. It makes you think. If you had to assign a net positive or negative impact of this entire chemical group on society, where would you even begin?
It's a tough calculation. The story of Group 17 really shows us how a single chemical tendency, in this case the drive to gain one electron, can lead to the best and worst outcomes, and forces us to be incredibly careful.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Group 17. We hope you feel a little bit more well-informed.